Engagement panel. I would like to acknowledge the presence of some of our board members and also university authorities, our president, Fernando Leon, here with us today. Thank you for your presence and also the presence of students and faculty members and other guests from the CETIS University family, as we say. In a rapidly changing, interconnected world, higher education faces more challenges today than ever before. Institutions are seeking to transform the higher education experience through innovation that allows them to become more efficient and ensuring quality at the same time. In this context, CETIS Universidad is seeking to further the conversation that began last year at its international seminar on innovation in higher education, where more than 40 global higher education leaders discussed trends and challenges regarding this important issue. The Innovation in Higher Education series continues this year in our 56th anniversary with panels and conferences held across our 3 campuses where we are discussing innovation in global engagement, like today, innovation in accreditation, as well as student success and retention strategies. Today, we welcome Dr. Barbara Hill to our panel, Innovation in Global Engagement. Let's give her an applause. And before I have the opportunity to introduce our guest, I would like to mention that this is a panel that was scheduled with 2 guests. I would like to mention that Dr. Arturo Cherboski Lask, Director of Universia and also Director of Santander Universidades Mexico, he could not attend this panel due to the earthquake in Mexico City. He is fine, as well as his family, and sends greetings to all of you. Now I will introduce Dr. Barbara Hill. Barbara Hill is the Senior Associate for Internationalization at ACE's Center for Internationalization and Global Engagement. ACE stands for American Council on Education. This center works with US and international institutions to promote global learning and help leaders think strategically about comprehensive internationalization. Barbara has served as senior consultant to the Higher Education for Development program, working to develop organizational infrastructure to serve international development through university partnerships and organizing conferences to disseminate expertise in international development. She was participant in the Visiting Advisors program of the Salzburg Seminar, consulting with universities in Russia and Eastern Europe about governance, management, finance, academic structure, and program quality. Dr. Barbara Hill continues to moderate the Intellectual Renewal Seminars for Leaders begun at Radcliffe College, Harvard University, which are seminars on leadership, ethics, and the good society for various professional groups. She has also served as chair of the board of directors of the Maryland Humanities Council. Dr. Hill has earned a bachelor's degree in English literature with honors from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and master's and doctoral degrees in English literature from the University of Washington in Seattle. She has held senior level administrative positions at several higher education institutions, among those Hood College, Barnard College in Columbia University, and has been provost of Denison University and also served as president of Sweetbriar College. Dr. Barbara Hill was an ACE fellow many years ago, and she continues to serve in leadership positions in this organization. And Dr. Hill will begin her presentation, and right afterwards we will open it up for questions and answers from the public. Thank you so much. Dr. Barbara Hill, let us give you another applause and welcome you to Cetis University.
Thank you. It's very. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here, and I need to start out by saying this is my third visit to Cetis. The first one was in 2008 when Cetis decided to join the Internationalization Laboratory. 2 years later, we came to do a encouragement from a collegial standpoint about what you had said your directions were going to be. And I have brought with me a team of 3 people who are going to help say, okay, you've come this far. Where do we go now? I will say that over these 3 visits, I can certainly say that Cetis is not the university now that it was then. It's still true to its core of helping prepare students to be globally competent. But it is doing it in a broader framework, and that is what I think is innovation that is really the right kind of innovation. Innovation is a tricky word, and this is something that I'm always looking at words. If you've been an English professor, you are always looking at the words and what they mean. Well, innovation means doing something new. There are very few things in this life that are brand new. And I think that's at the core of what ACE tries to do, is to help you find out what are good things going on elsewhere for you to see if you want to adapt them and if they're true to the culture and traditions of your organization, even as you're moving off on a much more accelerated path. I would say that's true. So I just want you to know I've been a friend of Cetis for quite some time, and I'm glad to be back again, and even participated in the earthquake drill yesterday, which made me feel, yeah, we all cope with different things. I am so pleased to know that Dr. Trubowski and his family are well, and members of my team are very pleased to, our hearts go out to the people who are being affected by this tragedy. And we admire the resilience and bravery of those who are affected. And that includes the earthquake that was in the southern part of Mexico not that much longer ago. So, you know, as we cope with our tragedies in the United States, we are very empathetic to the ones that you are dealing with. I wanted to say, I assume that Dr. Trubowski would have told you about what they do to help foster the kind of innovation that you are achieving. So I have some notes here, and you'll pardon me if I read from them. I do not have a slide for this. The history of ACE's relationship with Banco Santander Universia. We know that Universia has provided scholarship funding to ACE fellows from Mexico, especially Cetis, which has 10 fellows. I think 11 actually went through the program, but you have 10 who are still on campus. And that's a leadership development program that helps individuals find out how they can contribute the most, given their own skills, to higher education. Also, Universia has organized a delegation of Mexican rectors to attend the ACE annual meeting every year since 2013. Now you notice this is all sort of extending outward. Universia has sponsored a recent research report, which Heather Ward down there has a few copies of. It is called U.S.-Mexican Higher Education Engagement, Current Activities and Future Directions. And with the help of Santander, ACE has organized professional development seminars on internationalization for Ibero-American higher education leaders in partnership with Universia, and those have been held in Miami twice, and you're planning another one somewhere, aren't you, Heather? In Quito. Okay. So this is a long, involved relationship with us and Santander. But we're having some new directions at ACE, or the Center for Internationalization and Global Engagement, which we've never found a proper way to shorten. SIGI just sounds horrible. Nonetheless, we continue on. We're going to be having a greater emphasis on global engagement in addition to internationalization. We see the importance of positioning U.S. as a collaborator with other national higher education systems in order to address shared challenges such as attainment, degree completion, and equity. This is a topic of a new 2-year program that's going to be funded by the Lumina Foundation to create a global learning community of 8 higher education systems, including Mexico. And President Leon Garcia and Dr. Chrbowski will be very involved in this project. And because we have a broad membership base of 1,800 higher education institutions, we're in a position to help facilitate partnerships so that we can share our resources and our knowledge in order to help students be more globally competitive. So we're going to be working on those projects in the future. Right now, the ties we have with Mexico, our institutional connections are extensive, complex, and long-standing. And while partnership activities seems to be concentrated at the border, there is the opportunity to involve greater numbers of U.S. and Mexican institutions and to include diverse types of institutions. Bilateral relationships are strong enough to weather political tensions between the countries and even walls. I know that President Leon Garcia has written about this in the U.S. higher education press, and I personally don't believe in walls, but that's my personal opinion. The Puentes program developed by Anuis and Fimpes, in which CETIS is a participant, they're getting ready to enroll DACA students from the U.S. And this morning, the president of ACE, Ted Mitchell, wrote a letter to all the presidential members of ACE asking them to create case studies of the good things their DACA students are doing and to then make sure that their state senators and members of the House of Representatives hear what this means to the United States in hopes that we can change a few minds and make sure that those students who are dreamers get to dream in the U.S. if they choose, and here in Mexico if they choose. In any case, it's a very fluid time for us to be operating in higher education. And there's an old Italian expression from the Renaissance, sprezzatura, which means grace under pressure. Another way of translating it is to make hard work look easy. I'm not sure which one I prefer. And then there was the expression that was used in England during World War II, which was a particularly dark time for them. Keep calm and carry on. So that's the direction of what I'm going to be talking about today. This is sort of the way we see ourselves at the Center for Internationalization and Global Engagement. We've been working on the internationalization of universities and colleges since 2003 in a very concentrated way, though we were working on it a little earlier than that in the form of meetings and symposia. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Then the global engagement of us with institutions and systems outside the United States has certainly accelerated in the last 4 years. And we want higher education internationally to advance. So even though it says the American Council on Education, I prefer to think of it as the America's Council on Education rather than restricting it to the United States. So we've done some new programming to help us with our projects. Research is how you find out what's going on at other institutions that might be useful for you to adapt as you think about your journey to comprehensive internationalization. So we have done the mapping survey, which I'm sitting with on my lap because I'm going to give you some of the latest that we have discovered. We've done it every 5 years, and now we've got a 20-year trend line of what has been growing. And it varies from one period to another because every 5 years you find yourselves in a different cultural and political situation so that you end up having to make adjustments. Maybe sprezzatura has to do with the idea of flexibility. So we are relying heavily on the latest findings, and the volume I have is the 2017 volume. We do issue briefs. We do them on specific countries like China and India. These are written by experts in the field to help you understand what opportunities are. And this is the same issue brief is where the U.S.-Mexican Observatory paper is available. We do CIGE Insights. We've done one on tenure promotion and putting internationalization into that. I realize your system is different, but it certainly can be a useful thing to think about how faculty are recognized and rewarded for their international work. Then we have internationalization in action, which is a research picking on a specific topic and then interviewing institutions that have been active in this area to find concrete examples of good practice. All of this is posted on our website, so it's up-to-date information. We ran a 4-part series on internationalizing the curriculum. First at the course level, then at the program level, then at the overall degree level, and then in terms of the discipline. And again, all of these are real things that real institutions are doing. Similarly, we've started a series on international partnerships. What are the ways that you start them? What are the ways that you nurture them? And how do you review them and decide whether you want to keep on with a particular partner? So the research is a whole new thrust for us at CIGE, and it is meant to be helpful to institutions for finding out in a very quick and convenient way what might be issues that you would want to address. Again, issues you'd want to address so you can do something new. So that's the innovation part of it. We have programs to assist institutions to internationalize. Besides the Fellows Program, which has been very active for a very long time, I think it was started, I think I was in the 15th class, so it must have been started in 1965, I think. Yeah. Okay, so we've been creating leaders throughout the world through that program. And when institutions like the Santander Bank get behind the program, it certainly spreads quality leadership outside the U.S. I put it here in the short form, the lab. It's the Internationalization Laboratory. It has been around since 2003. It is built on a cohort model of a learning community, and they go through a particular process for 20 months to help say what direction an institution wants to go in. I've been there through the beginning. I have worked with 115 colleges and universities, and we have 2 additional cohorts that have been started. We're now up, if we count the most recent cohorts, 135 universities and colleges. And SETIs was the first international institution to participate. Very forward-thinking. Since then, we have worked with a university in Lebanon, and are working now with 2 universities in Colombia. And Susan Carvalho, sitting here in the front row, is the liaison to those institutions. So we are spreading our global engagement to help education worldwide by sharing what we know. Lab 2.0, this was something I created a couple of years ago because institutions, after they've been working with their sense of international direction for 5 years, they want to know how they're doing. So this is kind of like a booster shot you get, when you're inoculated with something and you need to have something come in and help you do that. That's why my team is here at SETIs this time, to sort of say, this is where you thought you wanted to go in 2010, and here we are to help you refine that, re-energize that, and think about it moving forward. Now, internationalization doesn't have to be its own thing. It can be the foundation that gives you impetus for everything else you do. It can be a cross-cutting theme rather than a specific thing. So when you think about education for making students globally competitive, then that becomes a way in which internationalization undergirds everything you can do. What is internationalization? Well, I created this definition just because I was tired of trying to help institutions figure out what was the difference between globalization and internationalization. It's a pretty fluid definition. Globalization is the movement of people, ideas, goods, capital, services, pollution, and diseases across borders. Some of that sounds pretty good. Some of it sounds a little threatening. And sometimes it's hard to move people across borders, as we are finding out. And I'm not just thinking about DACA and the wall and all of that. I'm thinking about the refugee crisis in Syria, the refugee crises from other places where people have had to leave war and or persecution. And you cannot pick up any newspaper that tracks world politics without seeing some of that almost every day. Now Myanmar comes to mind. What is internationalization? It's higher education's engagement with that reality. So if you know what the world is and how it's behaving, and you want to engage with it, then you are being international. This is the prettiest slide I have, sorry. I used to think I wanted to make it into a tattoo that I would put on people's forearms so that they would know that this is what they were supposed to do. But since I have a fear of needles, I knew I couldn't get around to doing that. Nonetheless, you will see that there is an arrow going across the bottom. Comprehensive internationalization encompasses these 6 dimensions. And if you're going to do it comprehensively, you indeed need to use the 6 different dimensions. The first is articulated institutional commitment. Obviously, if an institution says it wants to do something, that's got to be there. Then you have to have a structure for getting it done, and how do you move things forward. The part that we think are central are the pillars that have to do with curriculum, co-curriculum, and learning outcomes, which affects the students, but it also affects the faculty who have to be in a position to deliver an internationalized curriculum. Then we think about faculty policies and practices. The number of faculty who have gone to international conferences has been amazing at this institution in the years since the lab was first started. And policies have shifted as well. And these are all good things for an institution that is not stagnant. It is for movement that you want to have these things. These are the 2 central pillars, the faculty and the students. Now, the 5th pillar is what people used to think was internationalization, student mobility. How many are going away to have an experience? And you've made great progress on that. And how many are coming in from other places so that students have the opportunity to interact with people from other places, even as they're on campus. That used to be all that people thought about as internationalization. But even if you have as big a number of students going abroad and having an international experience as you do, I think the figure is 53%. Ceci, okay, got it. What about the other 47%? And that's why you have to think about the curriculum. It's absolutely mandatory. Otherwise, you create an elitist class and you are not helping students become globally competitive if they can't have those experiences. So that's important. The latest thing that is happening a lot of is collaborations and partnerships. And I note that CETIS is indeed active in this regard as well. And there are reasons why people are doing it. Sometimes it's to bring students into the institution through exchanges. Sometimes it's to bring faculty into the institution on exchanges or your distinguished international scholars. Sometimes it's to set up research collaborations. With the technology and the very pragmatic focus you have in your schools and programs and your colleges here, it's important to think about those programs in terms of how they look internationally, and you find that out by doing the research that will help you measure your effectiveness in reaching students and making them globally competitive. So I'm going to move to the mapping. I'll leave this on the top here so that you see it. But when 1,164 institutions answered our survey. Now, most of them, yes, are U.S. institutions, but it's important for you to see what they think they are doing to make their students globally competitive. First of all, institutions are optimistic about their internationalization progress. Nearly 3/4 of the respondents replied that internationalization accelerated in the last 5 years, and the proportion of institutions reporting high or very high levels of internationalization rose from just over 1/5 to 30% within the last 5 years. So this is a train that has left the station, and it's going to continue to roll forward. We asked the questions actually to sort of match up with these 6 dimensions so that we were trying to get a handle on things. Internationalization is increasingly an administrative intensive endeavor coordinated by a single office or a senior international officer, and more institutions are implementing policies, procedures, and planning processes to guide this forward. In-house models when it comes to developing resources for internationalization and the management of activities and programs. For example, most institutions will do their own recruiting for international students and develop their own set of study abroad programs, but an increasing number are using outside entities to engage with these success in these areas. Third-party program providers will provide places where institutions can send students. Funders are doing that as well, and sometimes helping you with international partners. There is a growing sense of using pathway programs to bring international students to your institution. It's a very big business, and it requires usually long-term contracts and committing institutions to having somebody else represent them and their strengths. When I was an ACE fellow, I spent one terrifying year as the acting director of admissions. And one thing I learned about was institutions need to control their own brand. They should not delegate that responsibility to others, because as soon as you do, you don't know if the institution that's being described is the one that students will come to. And there's nothing worse than having a student come and then leave because the advertising wasn't on point. While student mobility has consistently been a focus, this data suggests an increasingly sharp emphasis in this area. And certainly that's been true here at CETIS. So you are at the forefront of what other institutions are doing. In the United States, the desire to bring in international students has been pronounced, partly because federal and state governments have pulled back funding from institutions. So American institutions, US institutions, are indeed looking for international students who can bring tuition revenue to their campuses. It's particularly exacerbated at publicly funded institutions where international students may pay twice the tuition that is charged for local residents. And in the case of community colleges, sometimes it's even 3 times higher. So seeing international students as a revenue stream is indeed growing, and immigration policies are making that really tricky in the United States, or the threats in changing immigration policies. And so again, flexibility, Sprezzatura, keeping on, becomes very, very important and difficult, actually. There's an increasing percentage of institutions that are implementing academic and co-curricular policies that facilitate on-campus global learning. And that's a trend because you can't send 100% abroad unless it's a specific requirement in a program. More internationally focused professional opportunities for faculty, and certainly SETIs is innovating in this way, definitely. And it's important because although there are questions about how does the institution recognize that faculty are the key drivers of global learning, internationalization. So it's that sense of recognition that then becomes a problem. And international partnerships and activities abroad are garnering increased attention, energy, and support. I will say that it's changing in that institutions are more concerned about how do you find the right partner? How do you go through the courtship of making that partnership happen? How do you set up the terms that are mutually beneficial and respectful? How do you evaluate if the partnership is having the impact you want it to have? And if it's not, do you have a graceful way of breaking off the dating relationship? Those are some of the new directions in which institutions are going, and those become important for institutions who want to innovate. We also think some things are going to be happening in the near future. So the next part is looking ahead. We found that most internationalization efforts are still focused on external relations, going out, going away, meeting with other people, rather than focusing on the things that are sustainable, which are the ones you build internally. It is not an accident that we put curriculum and faculty in the center of our model. And we know that there's a need for more research in different places. And we end by saying it's impossible to ignore U.S. political developments in early 2017. Jorge Ramos did a marvelous job expressing the difficulties that we have in our country. And I hope my comments have led you to understand that not all of us believe as the president, I won't say our president, I'll say the president, the things he articulates. It's because I live in Washington, D.C., every morning I pick up the Washington Post and the New York Times with fear and trepidation about what has gone on the night before. I do not follow his tweets, so I expect somebody else to report on them for me. But that's affecting the way U.S. institutions think about internationalization, particularly because some of the changes that are implied or executive orders that are given affect people. And higher education is about the development of people. And things that prevent us from helping to develop people are policies that ACE for sure is working to change through both direct political action and indirect political action. So You're moving along. You are already innovating. You're becoming globally engaged in the way that a lot of institutions are. But it becomes important to remember that you were the first institution that engaged ACE to help you think about how to move it forward. And for that, I think you will always have a special place in my internationalization heart. Thank you very much for your attention. Are you going to stand at the podium, do you think? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara Hill, for your words, your wisdom that you have shared with all of us on the internationalization in higher education. As you just said, we have to talk about comprehensive internationalization, and that means being engaged with reality in and trying to answer the why, not just the what we do, but also the why we do it. I'm sorry.
Have a list and you can do a checklist. But if you haven't asked yourself why, you need to move to this slide. Enhancing the institution's reputation, preparing students for global citizenship, making students more competitive, generating revenue, enhancing the research agenda, which is an increasingly important one, and making a better, more understanding world. That's my vision. I'm a humanist, and I can't get away from it. Believing that we have to be doing it to make the world better. I'm sure that the slides can be shared with the community because you can't take notes that fast. I know that. I've been at these meetings, and I kept a number of slides somewhat limited so that they could easily be shared, or even if you want to post them on your website. Okay, bye.
Oh, thank you. We will share the files, and as you just mentioned, it has to be aligned and at least from the CETIS perspective, it's done with the intention of giving our students the right competencies for succeeding in life. Now let's have questions from the public. Please raise your hand and I'll give you the microphone.
Welcome again. Perhaps I did not understand your comment, and but I want to understand it regarding the payment of double or 3 times tuition from students from abroad. How do you justify that from a moral or mission statement of the university? How can you actually do that?
I don't justify it, but publicly funded institutions in the United States do justify it because they are not getting the same level of financial support from their state government. Public institutions operate very differently from private institutions. Private institutions do not have differentiated tuitions like that. So that if you were looking for comparable institutions, you would look at ones who have a similar structure to you. No, I mean the seminars that I have done for intellectual renewal for leaders would take that issue up as not working towards a good society, but just being opportunistic and thinking of higher education as a business. Higher education benefits from some business principles in the sense of management of resources, et cetera. But it's sort of like somebody running a con game, you know, charging you more and then not giving you the support services you need to do it. I would not be a president of that kind of organization.
But
Yeah, Fernando.
let me just try to put it in the context, I think, primarily for our students. Right now I'm writing a paper for an event at Universidad Alcalá de Henares where I make sure that I'm using all the data from ACE, from university, et cetera, citing the sources. But I think that when you think about internationalization, whether it is for the right or for the wrong reasons, whether we share it or not, there are many different interpretations.
Sure.
That's the core of the paper that I'm writing. And in one case, it deals with capacity building. And you might say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, what you find is that there are many countries that do not have the type of access, or have access but not to the type of education that their country needs. Therefore, then, they become net exporters.
Yes.
And the US and the UK and France and Germany and Canada and Australia and now even China are becoming net importers. Just so that everybody knows, there are about 4 million who go abroad, and the number is rising. Of those 4 million, 1 million and change go to the US. About 400,000, almost 500,000 go to the UK, etc. And they go there under different conditions. In the case of public institutions, you know, they have to serve the local constituents. And so they find this as something amenable from two perspectives. You internationalize the domestic student experience by bringing in foreigners,
Yes.
and you charge in the process. In the case of privates, you charge the same. In the case of privates, you're mandated. You can't do it any other way because otherwise
Yes.
you would be violating the terms. So there's that perspective. And then there's the perspective also of those who want to serve a broader region. The notion of internationalization as educational hubs. This is a concept that I'm trying to convince our government, our state government. Baja California is so well positioned, it should become a hub. Just like Singapore, just like the United Arab Emirates, where they're not only serving their own, they're serving a broader region.
Right.
So I think that, to be fair on this, you have to be cognizant of that. And that if you're an institutional leader, you need to find a way in which you are representing your constituency appropriately. So I'll share what we do. In the case of public institutions, we know they're going to charge double or triple. So what do? We talk to them to make our case. And we say, we are border institutions just like you. And you're going to benefit as much as we are. And so you should try to charge as much as you're charging the locals. Or if anything, charge a premium that would be equivalent to the tuition that CETIS is already charging its students. Not more, just the same. So I think that, you know, so long as you're aware that that's the name of the game with certain institutions, you are able to better represent what you can then achieve and get for your own students. So in our students, we're private institutions. And so in a private institution, you know that there's tuition involved. There's going to be some kind of fee. And so what we try to do is make it as accessible as possible to our students. And part of the partnerships and collaborations involve identifying folks who see internationalization as a two-way street.
Yes.
And that therefore, the conditions under which we're going to send them students, or we're going to receive students, are supposed to be amenable, receptive, that can make it a financially sustainable formula.
When I was a president in Virginia, the Virginia public system was pretty strong. And yet, not all Virginians could get into the private institutions because they had limits on the size of those institutions. So the presidents of the privates made the argument, I don't remember exactly how we framed it, but we said, we have the capacity to absorb students from Virginia in greater numbers if you would subsidize them for our private tuition. And the state legislature bought it because if they didn't, they would have to have greater outlays of capital projects to absorb those students into the public system. So we had what we called, can't remember, tuition equalization grant or something like that. And it's very effective and still is in operation. So we feel quite pleased about that because we were able to help the taxpayers of the state not having to build more public institutions because the private institutions could do it as well. So I just offered that as a blast from the past when it worked in terms of that.
Not to monopolize, or monopolize the
We always like
dialogue,
conversing
but
with each other.
we always talk whatever forums or events we're at. But I think that we're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
These are students that are already involved. But can you comment a little, as we are trying to, on the one hand, further increase that 53%, we know 100% is going to be tough.
Yeah.
Unless you have something compulsory, like Worcester Polytechnic Institute, or like other institutions, in Europe, or Georgia Institute of Technology.
Right,
There are very few that have 100%.
right. And
So we know that there's going to be a limit in terms of how much more we can increase that. By the way, in 3 years' time,
Yes, in 3.
in 3 years' time, business students will be 100% because it's embedded into the requirements. They're going to have to go abroad. But we're going to have social science and engineering. It's going to be tougher.
Yeah.
So we have two challenges. One is, what do you do to send more out and create the conditions? Two, what do you do to bring the rest of the world here?
Right.
Through the curriculum, through foreign students, et cetera.
Yeah.
What we've noticed is going out that there's a trend that acknowledges shorter term,
Yes,
more applied,
yes.
value added, for some double degree,
Mm-hmm.
certification, linked to an internship, etc. So, and on the other hand, we have been working on the learning outcome side also. So that other 47 right now that we don't have, hopefully it'll be just 30 later on, are getting this. So we're working on this, we're working on bringing in, and then we're also trying to create one of our campuses as the international campus, so that it's a kind of international experience at home at one of the CETIS campuses with foreign students, with foreign professors, et cetera. Two things I would ask. One, to what extent, although we're preaching to the choir, can you stress to our students, from your perspective, the importance and value of having whatever type, long-term, minimal, applied, theoretical type of international experience? And then two, what would you suggest, although it's part of your visit, and we'll get a long list of recommendations for sure, that we can do in terms of internationalization at home? And again, taking the advantage that we've got emissaries, and as we call evangelizers of internationalization.
Yes.
Our faculty are currently the evangelizers, and
Yes.
our deans, but our students can become the evangelizers also.
Well, it seems to me, to answer the first question, employers are more and more looking for students who are interculturally competent, who can move in groups that are not entirely like the people they grew up with. And so that's one of the reasons for having internships, or in the case of Worcester Polytechnic, because I worked with them when I was at AAC&U, and we were trying to define what a globally prepared student would be. They were dealing primarily with engineering or very practical sort of things, and as part of their curriculum, the students had to do a project, and they thought that having a project that would affect something that was an international or global problem was useful. The one I remember the best was the students who did mathematical models of how many boats go through the Grand Canal every day, setting up what kind of waves that were eroding the historic buildings. And they managed to convince the city government to make changes in how goods were brought into the Grand Canal by having depots that then eliminated the great number of boats in the canal. Now, I thought that was just a really fun project. And they didn't have to, they could do a lot of that calculation at home, but they had to see in person what the stuff was going to be like. It's the intercultural communication, or not being scared of it, that is the great selling point. That's why international students sometimes say they come to the United States. They want to have an American experience. And so that then becomes something that they want to have, and they don't want to be segregated into groups of international students. They want to be made part of the mainstream. And Heather Ward has done work on that for ACE. And we have a whole project on internationalization in action about how to make those communities interact very, very well. So I think that sort of gets at what I was thinking about for the first part of your question. Remind me again what the second one was. Internationalization at home is terrific. I mean, when you think about it, if you have a whole crop of students whose values are different from yours, whose senses of humor are different from yours, how do you learn to get along with them? I was in a carpool once when I was a young professor, and it was a number of women, actually, going from the Washington, D.C. area to Hood College, 35 miles to the north, and we spent 45 minutes each way each day. One of them was from Gujarat, India. One of them was from, she herself was New Jersey Italian, but married to an Egyptian. And on occasion, we had one Texan. You know, that's its own country anyway, so you had to somehow deal with that. And then on occasion, we would take pity on one of the economics professors who was Pakistani. Well, when he got into the car, then he and the woman from Gujarat started speaking in Urdu. And you know, the rest of us tried to figure it out. But I learned, for example, that when somebody laughs and they're from India, they're not necessarily laughing because something is funny. They're laughing out of a sense of embarrassment. And that then makes your relationship with them very different because they express themselves in different ways from the way you might. So I'd say that's probably really, really important for students. And you can do that in communities. Just go to Heather Ward's stuff. I mean, she knows how to do it. You can even talk to her at the end of this presentation if you want. And think about ways. And students can do an awful lot of this themselves. How would you want to be welcomed into a place where you'd never been? What would it take for you to feel at home in the world? And then just, you know, do unto others what you would have them do unto you. Think about it in those ways. And student organizations can do an awful lot. And, you know, if somebody says football to you, it doesn't necessarily mean the Rams.
That means the Soros here, right? But let me just try to prompt them. How many have gone abroad already? Okay. How many plan to go abroad? ¿Cuántos piensan irse de intercambio?
How many of you are scared of going abroad? Well, there are ways to deal with that institutionally, too. You can have pre-programs to help you understand the place you're going to go so you don't make a misstep that would keep you from having friends. So many institutions have pretty elaborate ways of helping prepare you, And then when you come back, they frequently will do a debriefing so that you will become reflective about what you did. When my daughter studied abroad, her institution did not have this pre-stuff or post-stuff. So as a superannuated mother, I learned how to use the internet and would ask her questions at the end of every week for her to reflect on something that had happened, and then asked her to summarize it. She wrote an editorial for her school newspaper on the value of an immersion program to help convince her fellow students that they should take advantage of it. So, you know, peer pressure can be really interesting in positive ways, and that, I think, would be very, very helpful. But it's that kind of support services before you go to help you get over the fear. And I had that too. My first trip abroad was to Korea, Japan, and Hong Kong in 1965, when the students there were in the streets revolting against the sitting president of Korea at the time, South Korea, pardon me. Boy, that brings up another hot spot. Anyway, and you know, at that point, American students, US students, weren't as politically active. For me to get out of Seoul, the cab had to go through a phalanx of police in gas masks because they were getting ready to tear gas the students. And I thought, whoa, that's putting yourself on the line in a way that was a little bit frightening. But it was also very interesting to see why students would have different attitudes towards their involvement in the country that belonged to them as much as it did the older people. How are they going to get it and take it and make it their own? And so I came back with other kinds of ideas, and then in graduate school in '67, everything broke loose in the US. So, you know, it's useful to know why people are acting the way they are. You can get it from reading a good novel, but it's much more fun to go because you get to eat the food too.
Another question from our students. It could be in Spanish as well. If, yes. Okay. Yes, on the back. Yes.
Are you the guy with the drone? Somebody up there has a drone. Okay, yeah, I noticed it coming in and I thought, oh, I like the colors. What does it do? Oh, okay.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm very glad to be here and saw your presentation. I very like the thing about you say about the students, the global engagement. It's very important for students because the students can be leaders. But what happens if it doesn't exist?
You mean the leadership, or if the opportunity doesn't exist?
The global engagement.
Well, you're either going to be a leader in your profession or in your community. And there's no way that our communities are isolated anymore. You have large international corporations here. You have people coming through Mexicali. Mexicali is expanding, that's for sure. I've learned that since my first visit. And I can't think of a single profession where you shouldn't be thinking that what you need to know depends on knowledge that's created in lots of different places. And I think that's important for you. That's one of the reasons why ACE does its kind of giving you examples from other places so that you become, it's an old-fashioned word, cosmopolitan. That at ACE, we used to have a vision statement that said we hope that our institutions were creating circumstances so that their students would feel comfortable in a multicultural community at home or abroad. And I think that's a valuable circumstance to really think about. I have plenty of stories about people who, you know, were living in Michigan and they'd never wanted to leave Michigan, and they got a good job at a company, and then the company sent them to China for 3 years. It's a long way from Michigan. And, you know, if you own your own business, that's one thing. But if you're working for somebody else, your skills may be needed in a place that you're afraid to go, and that can compromise your success. So you have to, I don't know, work on the bravery quotient a little bit, and sort of, you know, I didn't understand Korean. I certainly didn't understand Cantonese, which was the kind of Chinese that they spoke in Hong Kong in 1965. That was before China was opened up. And I didn't understand Japanese, but when I came back in the summer of '66, I took a year's intensive course of Mandarin, thinking that it might be useful to have the language. And I informally read and went to all the museums in Seattle, Washington that had Asian art, which I had found very appealing. I keep hoping that I can bring feng shui into my house, but I've accumulated too much stuff, so it's very, very hard. Okay, but do you see what I mean? It's being brave enough to take on the world, to be a leader. Yeah, go.
The answer you say is very makes sense, because I think be a leader is, well, you must to have knowledge for be a leader.
Mhm.
So I very or your presentation, it's the global engagement give you the knowledge, the very ideas to know how is globalization, and then get a great job for knowing your country. So also for another country, obviously like China or Japan or even the USA.
Yeah, every morning I get, my field was not business, but the McKinsey Quarterly has offices all around the world. And I get every morning a new report on global supply chains, on how technology can help you be more efficient in your business. I guess I'm just hungry to keep filling my head with new stuff, you know, because then I find out that global supply chains affect a lot of the things that I can think about. And so I just keep on reading, because it affects the price of vanilla in my local grocery store, or other such things. So yeah, leaders have to do that. And maybe when students do their global education, I'm not sure how that works here, but if you go as a group, you have a friend base, but you have to make sure that you still go and, you know, get into the culture and stuff.
Yep. Here, students typically, not all, but typically will start going towards the end of their second year. 76% do it either through the double degree or short-term sessions, and the most popular and increasingly the way to do it is group-based, because it allows to achieve the economies of scale that make it sustainable.
Right.
But one thing I wanted to say to the group before Francisco proceeds with the closing, how many of the students here are from Fortes? Any Fortes students? Nope? Not, I guess not today. Well, perhaps we're going to open it up not only to Fortes, Alberto, but since you talked about leadership, there was a pilot that we ran. Devorah Lieberman, president of Laverne, and I, we decided to play teaching, to go back to teaching. And I guess we did okay. There were no tomatoes thrown at us, and we survived the whole course. But what we did is we selected a group of honor students from Laverne, honor students from SETI, so therefore it was already a leadership course.
Yes.
And so what we tried to do is discuss from a cross-border, cross-cultural perspective, what is leadership and how does it carry across? So our board chair here and the board chair of Laverne decided to endow the course. So I just wanted to let the students know, be attentive, because there will be an invitation. I guess it's going to be not only for Fortes, but other students who want to learn about leadership, and where there would be a joint team. University of Laverne and SETIs leading that course. It's a course that would meet once a week. It will require physically going to Laverne once, bringing the whole group to SETIs once, and then in between we'll use the COIL type of engagement where it'll be live video conferencing, chat rooms, etc. But, you know, so if you are very interested in leadership and any others, there's going to be the second iteration of this course starting the semester of January through June.
Give my regards to Devorah. She did the same thing when she was at Wagner, but she was doing it with Greece and New York City.
Okay, well,
So, you know, a good idea can be adapted in a new circumstance.
Dr. Barbara Hill, on behalf of SETIS University, we appreciate very much your participation, giving us this opportunity to share your experiences with the SETIS community. And we are going to give you a little present, which is a token of appreciation from SETIS University, and also a diploma of or certificate for participation that has been signed by our president, Dr. Fernando León Garcia, and I kindly ask our president to come to the front to give you both. No, solamente thank you all of you, and we invite, thank you Dr. Leon, thank you Dr. Hill, and we invite you all of you to continue with the celebrations of the 56th anniversary.
and just one other thing, if you continue to see Dr. Barbara Hill and our colleagues who are also part of the ACE visiting team on Lab 2.0, you know, be open and attentive to any questions, information that they require. Yes. at the very least, Portañol, right? Sí. So thank you for being here. Yeah.